Siege of Dragonspear. Can you solo Siege? That's the question we're going to explore in this vlog. And while I'm not going to give away any spoilers in terms of the quest and various missions, that's for you to discover, we're going to talk a little bit about the game itself and the path itself. This idea that Siege is very interesting because for a long time between BG1 and BG2, we really didn't know what happened. I mean, how did you wake up in BG2 where you woke up? How were you even captured? What's going on? And of course, that sets the stage for an amazing story. Siege answered that. Siege gives you this window of not only what happened, but interacting with other key characters. Now, depending on where you finished in BG1 and start in BG2, the levels, Siege was going to have to be something very focused. It's not like you're going to end BG1 at level 7 and end Siege at level 20, because then you would go into BG2 just extremely overpowered, or the story doesn't make sense because you're powerful enough, it would have played out differently. So the idea behind Siege, it's a very linear story, and that's not a bad thing, right? They knew we have to make this very linear. You go to point A, to point B, to point C, to point D. There's going to be a couple of choices. There's a couple of side quests that you could play out. There's some interesting gear, but it's not kind of open free roam or this idea of, hey, there's a background story, however you want to approach it, that you find in 1 or especially 2 or later in Throne. So with that, the switch or the experience for Siege, and what I like about it was taking the whole idea of AD&D and BG and switching it differently. It's essentially a mass combat game. There are a lot more encounters. There are a lot more big battles. I mean, they're pushing the limits of the engine to the absolute test. It's exploring D&D in a completely different way. So team tactics, being able to have a role for every party member, being able to use spells and gear and potions, being able to click pause in the moment and say, okay, pause. Okay, here's what we're going to analyze. Here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to go. That is absolutely massive. So what that means for solo is there are elements of the game where NPCs, as in they're not party members, are helping you or fighting with you or acting with you. But that's just a script with some randomness injected into it. You don't really have any control over that at all, but you're still responsible for it. So I find Siege Solo is actually a lot more challenging than BG1 or BG2, even when you kind of know what you're doing. You've played through it a bunch of times. You know what encounters are coming. In theory, you know the optimal path. When it's just you, that's a lot. And even if you're relying on wands and other things, that's a lot. I find Siege to be very challenging solo. Not impossible, because the game, you develop tactics, you kind of learn and you optimize, and certain character classes are easier than others. But I think it's best as a party experience. You kind of lose some of the tactical flexibility and the point of playing the game when you go solo. And I'm not talking about minor romances or NPC storylines. Just combat is made to be part of a party, possibly even switching out party members at different points because they stay with you throughout the game as you pick them up. Is it able to solo? Absolutely. They all are. But it's a little more challenging, and I think you miss out on the point of the game being tactical battles, more tactical battles set in the AD&D narrative versus BG1, BG2, which absolutely, although it's not intended to solo, and you do miss out on those interactions, it 100% is able to solo the game.